All right, welcome back, folks. I'm Dave, and James Roguski is here on Stopping the Who. James, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Dave, and I'm just going to call it like I see it. Um, the COVID scenario that we've dealt with for the past 4 to 5 years was predicated on a fraud. And that fraud is associated with the PCR, the polymerase chain reaction process that was largely created, and a lot of the research was done by Kary Mullis, who we're doing this video on the fifth anniversary of his passing, somewhat in honor of his memory. And everyone can find this information on PCRfraud.com because the work that Kary Mullis did is very important, scientific research and laboratory work and all that sort of thing. But anyone who puts together the phrase PCR test is committing a psychological operation that is essentially fraudulent. These tests are not tests. It is a means of confusing people into believing that by submitting to, quite frankly, torture, having something shoved in your nose to take a swab from the back of your throat, often done improperly and quite frankly, malpractice. The jab, if anybody, or I should say the swab, if anybody pushes it in a vertical direction, is unaware of the dangers of that procedure. People around the world have been harmed. Stay tuned for my next article about that. What I'm trying to get across to the world with facts, not fear, but facts, is that the use of the PCR swab test was the cornerstone or the linchpin or the foundation and the Achilles heel of the WHO and the rest of the world's fraud that was perpetrated amongst the world, because those tests, that process, absolutely categorically cannot, and it's admitted around the world, cannot identify an active virion. It cannot identify a situation where it is used as a diagnostic. But to this day, the WHO still considers a positive PCR test as the definition of a case of COVID. I just want to give one example to let people know how deep this fraud goes. If you want to believe any part of this, and if you want to believe that viruses exist and that the jabs were beneficial, and you trace that all back to whatever they may have attempted to do with any sort of clinical trial of any of the jabs, the trials were predicated on determining, did the jab work or did the jab not work? And the way they determined that was with a PCR test.
Mm.
Well,
Right.
if the test is fraudulent, then every clinical trial on any product is fraudulent. Now, what I've done is I've collected all of the evidence from court cases and government documents and peer-reviewed, published, articles in respected journals around the world, put it all into one PDF so that anyone who wants to bring a court case, anyone who wants to bring a common law notice of liability, I've put it together as a notice and statement of facts. In law, whether you are part of the law society, the bar, or the legal system, or you're into common law, natural law, admiralty law, or commercial law, if you are proactive and you give notice of your position and you base that on facts, then the other person is put in a situation where they have to refute your facts.
Mhm.
That's not possible because the evidence is crystal clear that the foundational underpinning of what we've dealt with over the last 4.5 years was based on the fraudulent idea that someone could stick something up your nose and determine whether or not you were a danger to your fellow men, women, and children. When we pull that cornerstone, that card out from their house of cards, it not only puts out, the story as being fraudulent with COVID, but it goes all the way back to AIDS and HIV and SARS and swine flu and Zika and monkeypox and disease X and anything else that they might be trying to do with the latest is bird flu. There
Mhm.
are no cases of any of these diseases if those cases are based on a fraudulent use of the PCR process. So, what I hope people will do is read this document, watch the videos that are on PCRfraud.com, come to an awareness that we've all been gamed
Mhm.
by a technology that's very important in a laboratory setting, but if it is used to fearmonger and tell people that they have a dis-ease and they are a danger to other people, that is PCR fraud. And I encourage everyone to just spread the word, go to PCRfraud.com and become better informed about how this was done to us so that we can stop this aspect of this fraud from ever being used upon the population again. This must stop. Never ever ever submit yourself to a PCR test. Proactively send this information to politicians, public health officials, your doctor or other practitioner, your hospital administrator. Send it to anyone in your veterinarian's office. Send it to anyone in an agricultural department who might be going out and checking poultry operations or dairy operations or checking raw milk or they're even doing wastewater surveillance to try to scare
Yeah.
people by whatever it is they find, in your excrement. We, the people, have to become as informed as possible so that we can push back against PCR fraud.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a lot of different ways to push back. There is a lot of corporate capture out there, James, when it comes to, different. You're talking even about veterinarians. I had an experience with a veterinarian where they were instantly telling me that I was wrong and that the science has already been settled. There's a lot of cash involved here, so it's just sad that you can't get through to some people because they rely on this income and they don't want to lose it. And I think there's a lot to be said about that aspect of this, that corporate capture when it comes to the medical industrial complex at all levels. And that's another issue. Are we working on that issue as well? Are we talking about that as well on the PCR fraud, or is that just about the test itself?
Well, billionaires have been made in the testing industry. If you think about it, the push to test while people were not charged necessarily to undergo the process, government money, our debt, our taxes were used to channel billions upon billions of dollars into fraud.
Mm-hmm.
And I there are so many aspects to this. I encourage anyone and everyone who sees what we're talking about here as a means of pushing back against past, fraud and future fraud. Give
Mm-hmm.
me a phone call, 310-619-3055. The simple thing for people to do, watch the videos on PCR fraud so you understand how this, was perpetrated and do everything you can to spread the word so that other people become informed. But between people and government and industry and everyone else, your employer, you name it, whoever you want to talk to, step number one is to let them know that how we've been gamed. They may not be aware and they may not want to read or look or watch or learn, but if you put them on notice that they no longer can avoid the science, avoid the facts, avoid court cases and government documents and peer-reviewed journals, then the ball is in their court. They would be obligated to refute what is in the PCR fraud PDF document. And there's no way on God's green earth they're going to be able to refute this.
Nope, we lost James there. Oh, there you are.
That the
You,
PCR test is not a, anyone who attempts to use it in that manner to claim that there's a case of this, that, or the other disease is committing fraud and deception. And so I firmly believe that armed with the proper information, we can take this fraud down because they're going to keep doing it until we stop them.
all right. Well, on that note, your connection was getting a little unstable there, so I think they finally cracked the code when you were talking about the PCR fraud, and we want to leave it right there. James Roguski, as always, thanks for being a guest here, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Dave.